Yeah, so welcome everyone. I would like to welcome you to another webinar in the Women in Geospatial Career Development webinar series. And today we're going to be talking about geospatial writing. My name is Petra Millarova, and I have a master's degree from Prague, the Czech Republic, from geomatics, and I'm currently living in Canada and working as a software engineer. Before we start, I would like to excuse one of our panelists, Anusuya, because she has fallen ill and she unfortunately won't be joining us today. And I would also like to give a shout out to Go Geomatics Canada because they've provided us with this Zoom account. So yeah, without them, we wouldn't be able to do this event either. So yeah, before we get started, I would also like to say a few words about Women in Geospatial Plus. So our mission at Women in Geospatial Plus is to build an inclusive global community, uniting, inspiring, empowering all women plus in geospatial to become strong leaders and change makers. One of the ways we do this is we run a webinar series on career development, which this event is part of. And if you're interested in the past events, do check out our website, womeningeospatial.org. Another thing we offer to our members is the mentorship program, and we offer one-to-one mentorship as well as group mentorship. And last year we had 115 participants from 34 countries, so it was a great success. And the applications are currently open. The program runs from October till July, so I would like to encourage everyone to hop on the link on this page and learn more and sign up. If you don't already follow us on social media, then definitely do, because that's where you'll get all the information about upcoming events. And we also have a speakers database where you can register or search. So yeah, that's the link on this slide as well. I would like to invite you all to choose to challenge the current status quo in our everyday lives and inspire, unite, and empower. Those are the three pillars that Women in Geospatial Plus stand by. And lastly, we'd also like to announce a geospatial writing competition that will run through September to the end of the month. And there are currently 2 categories or topics to choose from, and the winning piece of each category will get published either by Go Geomatics or Geo Awesomeness, which is, I think, an excellent opportunity for upcoming writers. So for the submission guidelines, topics, and more information on the judges, check out the link on this slide, and we will of course be sharing the details on our social media as well. And if at any point during this event you would like to ask a question anonymously, then please join us through Slido as well. And you can just scan the link on the screen or go to slido.com and put in the code from the screen. And we will also be taking in-person questions at the end of the event, and we will stop the recording for that, so everyone has a safe space to ask whatever they want. And with that said, let's get started. So I would like to ask every panelist to first introduce themselves and say something about them, about why they like writing on geospatial topics and things like that. So Jasmine, would you like to start?
Sure. I'm Jasmine Fleming, and I'm a freelance content marketer and writer. I primarily work with companies in the B2B tech space, but that has also included geospatial companies as well. And I used to write in-house as a content marketer at Hexagon Geospatial. I think what keeps me writing within this industry is just because there's such a wide range of applications for geospatial technology. It fits into so many other industries and is a part of society as a whole through things like transportation, utilities, in ways that we might not even necessarily think about. So that's what makes me excited about it. There's always something new to write about.
Sorry, Rhian, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Rianne French. I'm an independent PR consultant, and I primarily work within the not-for-profit and international sector. I think what I love most, well, I mean, I love maps. That's what brought me into this sector in the first place. I love that maps tell stories, and with new technology, for example, story maps, you know, you can really bring data to life. And I think that's a really privileged position to be in, to, you know, to make sense of all that information that's flowing around the universe. And we get to say, and this is what it means. And not just this is what it means, but this is how it can make life better. It can really help the planet. It can really help people. And I think that's just a really lovely thing and positive thing to be able to write about. The other thing I absolutely love about this sector, and I think Women in Geospatial epitomises this, is the willingness to collaborate and to share experiences, and you know, just really the whole sense of us being a community. I think that's a really special thing, and something that should be celebrated.
Thank you. And Gavin?
Yeah, good morning. Well, good afternoon. So it's very early in the morning here in Seattle, but surveyors were up early. Yeah, I'm a practicing land surveyor. I've been doing this for 30-something years. And I got into writing through that back door that I kind of knew my technical subject and I had to learn how to write about it. There are not enough people, or were not enough people, in the geomatic side of geospatial writing and telling the stories and the positive things that come out of it. I mean, geospatial has undergone this huge transformation just in the last few decades, and in the last few years in particular. And what I really like about it is that, well, my inner geek is happy. I get to research and learn about new things and find out the fantastic work that people are doing, and really want to help them tell their stories.
Thank you, everyone. So as the first question, what do you think are some unique challenges in geospatial writing versus writing in general? And yeah, whoever wants to start, just say your thoughts.
I'll start if you like. I think the biggest challenge that I've certainly noticed is that we're really enthusiastic about the technological things that we do. And we have a lot of jargon and a lot of acronyms. And it's trying to just temper that enthusiasm for talking in a geospatial tone of voice and helping people to present things in terms that their audience will understand. And sometimes that does mean talking about maps first rather than just geospatial, and then going on to talk about how that's more than maps. They're not the maps that we remember, or that old people like I remember at school. It's something different. So I think that's a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity, because some of that technology is so visual and so interactive that actually you can soon bring in your audience. So I think when you're writing about geospatial, the visual element that supports your words is also important. So I think that challenge really is just transferring that enthusiasm and that passion into everyday language that we can bring other people into our vision. I think that's the key challenge at the moment.
I agree with Rhian that it's full of esoterics. Geospatial, there's two tiers to people that might read about it. There's the practitioners, where it's essential, and then there's the general public, where it's interesting, or can be, but only in certain subjects. And often it's sort of not controversial, but gee whiz, clickbaity type subjects. It's how to geek translate that for people. The old saying is that engineers can put a rocket on the moon, but they can't tell you how they did it. So we have to be the geek or geo translators.
Related to what both Gavin and Rhian said, I think there's just the added challenge that geospatial itself is an industry, but a lot of times we're writing content that fits into other industries. Like, for instance, if you are a healthcare writer, you might be writing for a healthcare tech company, and they might be trying to write content for hospitals and physicians. And so all of that's related within one industry. But within the geospatial industry, you might be writing content for people who work in utilities, people who work in maritime, people who work in mining, just, so many other applications for the actual technology. And so you're writing content that might be read by someone who's an expert in their field, but they might have very limited knowledge of geospatial technology. So it makes it that much more important that you're writing content in a way that's accessible to a larger audience. And you really have to focus on that question that you have to answer within all writing, whether it's copywriting, content marketing, journalism, that why should you care question. You have to answer that in all of your content. And it's even more important for geospatial content when it's written for a totally different industry.
Thank you for your perspectives. I think that's yeah, thank you so much. And so I guess one thing that ties in with this is, as it has been mentioned by, I think, all three of you, is that you have to make the story accessible, as Jasmine said, across multiple fields. So do you have any tips on how not to make the stories too tech heavy? Or I guess the message would be you have to know your audience, but I guess how to tailor the articles to your audience?
I would say from my perspective, that part has always been a little bit easier just because I don't come from the geospatial industry. I studied professional writing in college and then took classes in journalism as well, and then worked at the student paper. So I just tend to come from like an inquisitive sort of background. And I think just, being willing to ask questions and figure out what you don't know. And I think, just like I said, from my background, there was a lot I didn't know coming into the industry. Before I worked at Hexagon Geospatial, I probably had never even heard the word geospatial. So just from coming from that background, I know that there are, that a lot of times I've written content for other people who might be at the same technical level as me when it comes to this industry. And so just making sure that I get those same types of questions answered, the who, what, where, when, why, how, that type of information, the basics, that it's included in the content is definitely a goal in those instances. But like you said, it also depends on the audience. If it's content for like a geospatial trade publication, then you don't have to spell out as much of that. But if it's something for, say, a company blog or something that's going to have a lot more reach and could impact, people at different technical levels, then it's good to make sure you have those basics.
Yeah, I really agree with what Jasmine said. It is knowing your audience, and sometimes you can get away with using more technical vocabulary because that is the way that your audience talks about things. And actually, I think part of being a good storyteller is being able to find a common language with that audience. So if they are technical, you want to reflect some of that back in your thinking and the way that you're talking about things. If they're not technical, then obviously you want to do as Jasmine said and think about putting things in context and in a different way. But she's absolutely right. I mean, that the whole thing when you're writing that you've got in your mind, or you should have the whole time, is who, what, where, why, how. And I think as well, you shouldn't be afraid as a writer to say, I don't understand that, explain that to me, that doesn't make sense, because actually you are at that point putting yourself in the place of the audience. So you're looking to convey information, and you can't do that if you don't understand what it is you're writing about. So I think that's a really important point.
Well, the challenge works both ways too. A paper or, content can be too technical for a broad audience. But on the other hand, the challenge is if you're tasked with writing for, a specific geospatial vertical, you have to amp it up the other direction. One tool that is used often when you're trying to do the geek translate direction, get it for a broader audience, is the use of a sidebar. If the way to make something less technical is use less technical terms, the problem is you can completely lose the relevancy of a story. And I've seen some mainstream articles that touch on geospatial where they completely and utterly miss the point, to the point where they were, the assertion was the opposite of what was really going on, because they didn't really explain how one key element worked. If they had taken that one term and put a sidebar in, it was a little explainer of how that worked, then that concept could have been mentioned in there correctly. So yeah, that's one of the tools is the sidebar. Now with digital content, it's fantastic now that we can just put in hyperlinks to all kinds of deeper stuff for people to look and say, to understand this, please click here, and read this. That helps a lot.
That's such a good point, Gavin. And actually, sometimes if you're writing something that's perhaps not journalistic, but perhaps you're writing a report or something that's going out within your organization, you could always go old school and include a glossary. A glossary has saved me many a time when I've thought I don't understand that, and then I've looked and I'm like, oh, okay, that's what that is. So you could go a bit old school as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think that's something I haven't considered before, that it can also go wrong and you can oversimplify some concepts and completely miss the point of the article. So it's useful to know these tools. And yeah, I think I've come across glossaries as well during my time on the internet, definitely reading articles. But yeah, I haven't never thought of it as a tool to bring your topic closer to the readers. That's really interesting. So what tips and tricks would you have for people who would like to get started in geospatial writing? How can you, for example, how to find a place where you can contribute, or how to approach topics, where to find inspiration, or just the basic, what should be the first steps when you want to start writing?
One tip, and I mean, I come from a content marketing background, but I have done some writing for Geo Awesomeness, so I'll kind of speak from that perspective. But one tip from just that work that I've done is I was basically just, being on social media. I have a lot of connections on social who are in the geospatial industry, and I was paying attention to the publications they were sharing content from, and then seeing which publications were really, putting out a lot of content, and looking to see who the authors were, to see if they were more so like one or two authors who, that publication tends to lean on, or were they having a lot of different names. And so what stood out to me about Geo Awesomeness is that a lot of people were sharing their content, and when I would look at articles, it seemed like each time they were written by someone else. So that was kind of an indicator to me that they tend to work with a lot of writers and are open to working with new writers. And so when I reached out to them, just asking them if they worked with freelance writers, had any work that they needed help with, and told them about my geospatial background at the time, that led to writing some articles for them. But also the team there was great with connecting me to other opportunities, and I've actually worked with 2 other clients in the geospatial industry that I met through my work with Geo Awesomeness. So I'd say once you kind of get in with one place, just build good connections, and then a lot of time the referral network within geospatial can lead to other opportunities.
Yeah, I think it's about finding opportunities. So, if you're working in-house at the moment, look to see whether there's a company blog that you could contribute to, look to see if there's anything that they publish even on an intranet, just lots of opportunities to hone your way of writing and to find your own personal style, because I think that's quite important as well. People go to freelance writers because they particularly like their style. And I think part of what we do is fitting in with other people's style, but also, I think places like Geo Awesomeness, they like to have the personality of the writer come through as well. So that's quite important. But any opportunity you can find to write is a good one. You could even start up your own blog if you wanted to. It's just that case of getting it out there. when I started, and I started in regional newspapers in the UK, I actually got my first job through work experience. So I went to a paper for 2 weeks. I think I was 16 at the time. I went back every year in the holidays until I graduated university, and then they offered me my job. So sometimes you've just got to be persistent and just keep on showing that you can, you can do it. And you're the right choice. And of course, while you're doing that, you're building up a portfolio that you can take to show people. So persistence and resilience is really quite important as well.
So I've been the editor of several geospatial publications over the years. Well, of course, I have my day job, but part-time. And actually, a lot of the writers in geospatial are part-time that you see. They are practitioners, which means they, there's the subject matter expertise, and then they try to hone their writing skills. There's quite a few things that you need to have, like the professionals do. Rhian and Jasmine. I consider you guys more professional. I have no training at all in writing. I had to learn it the hard way. So I like the Star Trek quote, "Damn it, Jim, I'm a surveyor, not a writer." But if your goal is to get to the point where you get paid gigs, that's a different animal. But it's not that it's hard. It's just you have to go about it a particular way. There are so many publications out there, fantastic publications, Geo Awesomeness, and so many others, Coordinates Easing, it goes on and on. And they are always hungry for content and new writers. They're not necessarily going to pay for anything that's an op-ed piece. And the geospatial publications typically do not pay for content. Who does pay are manufacturers, the geospatial industry. That doesn't mean that you're being totally mercenary. That story needs to be told as well. And they want a slightly independent spin on things. So, but you gotta, as you mentioned, you develop your own voice, but not that your own voice drowns out if it's a paying client's, needs. So you want to create your own voice. And the easiest way in for a lot of people is to do op-ed pieces. Almost anyone could state their opinion about something and it could go into a geospatial publication. It's a lot harder to go beyond the opinion, the op-ed, into something a little more specific, like a case study, a feature or article about some aspect of geospatial. But building that track record, so those publications, Go Geomatics, we're always hungry for new content and trying to develop new writers all the time. But, getting those pieces in there so that you've got samples, examples, and then you can actually contact a manufacturer and say, by the way, I just, wrote a story about somebody using one of your products, and I really think that could be a good case study. That works. I recommend people to do it, and sometimes they do it. Now, often those outfits want a referral, but once you've got a bit of a track record and some samples out there, people are happy to do those referrals.
One other thing that I just wanted to mention is that I mentioned earlier social media, that I was kind of looking out for publications that were sharing a lot of content. But just being social on social media definitely helps as well when you're finding opportunities. And I'm going to speak from the freelance perspective here, but even outside of geospatial, I would say most of the clients that I've found and worked with since I've been freelancing have actually come through either me seeing someone post on social that they're looking for a freelancer, or me sharing some of my content and having people reach out. And I have had someone from the geospatial industry, one of my clients in the space, approached me because they found my LinkedIn profile. And I think they were searching around for like geospatial writers. And because my LinkedIn was optimized for that, that's how they found me, and they ended up becoming one of my clients. So I would say definitely, because a lot of geospatial technology is meant for B2B, have your LinkedIn profile optimized, because you never know who is going to be searching for what you do and who might reach out to you that way.
I forgot to mention one other route or outlet for content, and to get well known, it's getting well known in the core of different verticals within geospatial can be really helpful, because the further you go into a vertical, deeper into it, the less writers there are that specialize in that. I got to give geomatics and surveying as an example. There are very few people that write effectively and show up in the various publications. It's usually the same people all the time, and a lot of us know each other, and we're like, we need to bring in new writers. So there are professional association and society newsletters as well that have pretty decent circulations. Now, in the US, each state, there's a association for surveyors, and they have their monthly or semi-monthly publications. And for instance, California's has a circulation bigger than a lot of geospatial publications. So they are extremely hungry for content, and especially if it's someone that will help someone tell their story. There may be somebody that's got a really amazing project or story or case study or some quasi-legal research they've done related to it. They just don't know how to write it up. And having writers that can do that, that can get your name out there deep in those verticals where people are really hungry specifically for new writers.
So I have a few questions here from Slido on the previous topic. So the first one is, do you have any examples of blog posts or publications that do the sidebar well?
I can provide some to people if they want to contact me. And I might have a couple. I've got a website that all I do is just some samples. I don't really promote it much, but it's if a potential client asks, I can point them to a bunch of samples. So if you look at gschrock.com, gschrock.com, you'll see examples of features, articles, case studies, corporate profiles. And in some of those, you'll see where it jumps out into a sidebar.
I quite like Ordnance Survey's. They have a contributing editors series, and I quite like that because that has all sorts of different people from different sectors, and as Jasmine mentioned at the beginning, people who touch upon geospatial, but geospatial isn't their core market, if you like. And I think that's well worth a look on the Ordnance Survey website, ordnancesurvey.co.uk.
Thank you. And I guess sort of related is the second question here. Do you have any recommendations for a style guide for technical and or non-technical writing? So I would add to that because I would like to know, are there, does every outlet have their own style guide, or are there some that are more general?
I think mine have always come with a brief, so that the brief has contained the style guide, and then others I know because I'm an avid reader of the publication. I think Gavin might be better placed to add to that, perhaps.
Well, the clients, okay, if it's an industry client and they're going to pay you, they're going to send you a assignment sheet, and that'll have a lot of the guidelines right on there. And more often than not, they just say, well, look at some of our other case studies. It's like, okay, we've got this style that we've been running with, go take a look at it. And that's really valid. You look at a publication, and sometimes the publications, they're headed up like like some that I've been editor on, where it's a full-time practitioner and it's part-time. And we don't go to great lengths to put that out, but it's good to just proactively, without telling them that you're specifically doing, look at some of the stuff that they've got up there already, and as general ideas of tone, a little bit on style. And when it comes to fundamentals of writing, I wasn't professionally trained like the rest of you, so I kind of had to self-teach or learn the hard way. There are a lot of frustrated editors over the past 25 years that have put up with my travesties, because they went, okay, we want the geek side of it. We'll help you with the writing side of it. There's something I found really helpful in any new writers that I'm trying to foster or help move along. I have them pick up a very simple book, very smart, short book. It's called The Little Red Writing Book. And I just say, just sit down with a beer and read through the whole thing, because it's not necessarily that they're going to memorize everything in it. It's just that they're going to put them in the frame of mind where they're in that zone of thinking a little bit more about how they're putting it together. People, when they do op-ed pieces, they just do stream of consciousness, which is okay, but having a little structure to it. If you want to go even deeper, and I dig into this when I'm looking at particulars, is the Chicago Manual of Style. There are editors that will quote that to you when they're picking apart some of your some of your issues that they're editing. But yeah, imitation is the best form, is looking at what they've got out there as a template. So.
To add to what Rhian and Gavin said, they both mentioned content briefs and that companies will tell you, what they expect from the piece. But I have had a few instances where, blogging may have been new for the company, so they don't really have like past content to lean on, or they don't have like they don't have prior examples of what they want me to do or what they want me to match. So I do have a template, and you can kind of look up different questions that might be helpful for a content brief, but I have my own content brief template that if they don't provide that to me, then I'll give it to them, and it helps them kind of think through what it is they actually need and what they're trying to achieve. But it asks them, what the topic is, and to give me a lot of details around that, what the tone and the voice is, or should be, who the audience is that they're trying to reach, where this content is going to be published. It asks a lot of specifics like that to give, if they haven't thought about that, it gives them a chance to think about all of that. And then it also gives me a better understanding of what they want the content to accomplish and how I can help them with that. And I think, this webinar is about writing, but I also think anytime you can help if you're working with a client, or help the company to think more about content in a more strategic way, that adds even more value to what you can provide, and that would ultimately let them see more value in your work, because I think writing and strategy go hand to hand. And if you don't really have a strategy for the content that you're creating, or if they don't have that up front, then they might not be able to see if the content is successful, because they don't really have anything to measure that against once it's finished.
Thank you, Jasmine. That ties up really nicely with a comment that Helen left in Slido. She's saying, but for those of us who aren't writers, I highly recommend paying a professional like you three to help get your message out. Which, yeah, I think that's basically what you just talked about, Jasmine. It's not just the act of writing itself, but it's also like writing a piece is part of a strategy for the company or for the individual that wants to publish the piece. And I think that's really important as well.
I think that's quite interesting, and my experience over the years has been sometimes you start with a brief and the company or whoever's commissioning you thinks that you're going to be writing about, they think the focus will be one thing, and then as you talk to them and start interviewing them and doing some journalistic questions, it becomes quite apparent that actually that's not the story at all, and they're missing the most interesting and important part of the story. And I think that's part of the job of a writer as well, is helping people to tell the right story and not the one that sometimes their corporate thinks is the, you know, is the way to go. So I think, you know, as Jasmine said, you're always looking to add value, because one of the things you come up against is everybody thinks they can write, and it's only when they start that they realize actually sometimes, you know, they need a bit of help, or, you know, they need some professional support. So I think it's adding that value is so important. Makes clients remember you for sure.
The process is much more, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just a footnote on that last discussion. The process is much more complex than you might think. Yeah, you know, sitting down and just writing it, you've got more time ahead of you in the process of actually getting it published with all the people it has to go through, especially if it's a paying client. Now, a real key step I see, most of the paying clients that have been using writers for a while and have been having content published, the post-interview brief. So your client, let's say it's a big geospatial industry company, and you're doing a case study for them. They'll, you know, put out the assignment sheet, you interview the customers, and they will ask you to have a chat with them after you've done the interview. And part of that is to see what else you've discovered when you know, there may be other angles to it. I've seen case studies turn into multiple case studies because it turns out that customer was doing something else really cool beyond that initial focus. So, and then it goes through the internal clients first. So it goes through, there's going to be somebody that's going to do the, you know, proofreading and checking it and all of that. That's the easy part. That's mechanical. That's, you know, just, that's the rules of grammar and things. Fine. It's going through the internal teams, marketing and technical teams of the client. That's going to be quite a process. Your initial draft is going to, you know, it's going to bleed red markups. And no matter how good it is, they're just going to shred it and rip it apart. Sometimes you suspect that they're doing it because they feel compelled to. Well, that's true. It's not going to look like what you started out with often, but you're going to also influence that it's not going to turn out the way they intended. It's probably going to make it better than they originally had imagined. And that's where you can really add that value. And after a couple of times where you've done that value added part or got them to agree to it, that's when they're really going to value your services. And this isn't just the paid clients as well. This is the, you know, the industry publications as well. That can also be quite a process. And use test readers. Some other people in geospatial that you trust that could be brutally honest, and have them read it too before you send it in.
I think quite a good thing to do as well, and it's a purely practical tip, is I will very often sit and read aloud what I think is my final draft, because I'm constantly surprised at what I think I've written isn't actually what I've written. And when I read it aloud, I get a sense of the flow, I get a sense of the structure, and I look like an absolute loony doing it, particularly if you know, I'm sat in a coffee shop or something. But I just think reading it aloud is just a really good way to work out whether or not you know it flows correctly. And yeah, I mean, I've always done it, but that might of course just be me, and I do appreciate that, but I find it quite useful.
Oh, sorry, Jasmine, you wanted to say something as well?
I was just going to add that I think if you don't necessarily come from like a writing or a technical background, but you know, you're looking to get into geospatial writing, to definitely embrace the concept of just-in-time learning. I think that's how I approach a lot of projects, because usually when I bring on a new client, they have products or services that I'm not familiar with and having to do a lot of learning with. But even before then, when I was working in-house at a geospatial company doing content marketing, I mean, the first assignment I had was to edit a white paper on remote sensing and mining and like applications for mining. And I hadn't heard of remote sensing before. So that was like a totally new concept to me. And I was like editing this white paper with just all of these concepts I wasn't familiar with. So I definitely got someone in the company who was well versed in all of this and had been on like the education side of things, and kind of just sat down and like figured out, I looked at a lot of the existing content to figure out what I knew and what I didn't know. And then I went to someone in person and kind of got them to fill in the blanks. But I definitely don't try to learn everything all at once. And I think I take each new content opportunity as a way to figure things out. I think if you get too bogged down and say, I have to know this, this, and this before I'm qualified to be able to write content in this space, you'll probably be learning forever. So definitely take opportunities as they come and just embrace learning something new as part of each and every writing assignment.
Yeah, I think those were some great tips. So thank you so much. And one thing we've sort of touched upon was when Gavin mentioned that for the style guide, you look at what other people have written. And I guess another question would be how to avoid plagiarism, like how to properly attribute sources and how to avoid plagiarizing other people's work and not to get too influenced by other people's work, I guess.
I'd say when I'm looking at different resources, when I'm writing a new piece of content, I always keep up with every source that I've looked at, and then I take notes in my own words. I never like just copy paste from the sources that I find, but I always take the notes in my own words and then kind of compile it. I usually will try to like do a lot of research up front, and then kind of like, if I have the time, like let it sit for a day or two. And then when I come back to it, I don't really have the words that I read up front so much as like the concepts that I learned when I'm, reviewing my notes. And I think, I just from my like academic background, like document everything. Always quote everything. If it's not something that is in your own words, if you're quoting it, just make sure to keep up with it and attribute it in whatever style you may be working with. But I definitely think taking notes in your own words and trying to like learn a concept and then explain it back with your words definitely helps you to avoid plagiarism, but it also helps to make sure you have a deep understanding of like the concept, because I think as a writer, if you can't like understand the concept enough to be able to like write the content in a way that's clear, then your audience won't get it either. Like it has to be clear to you first to be clear to them. So yeah, I definitely think taking notes in your own words helps with that.
I think as well, don't be afraid to use quotes as long as you attribute them. And even statistics, to back up what you're writing about. And quite often that's a very nice way to give some credibility as well to what you're, the story that you're telling. So don't be afraid of plagiarism, don't be afraid to do those things because you're scared of plagiarizing, because actually most people's common sense would stop them from doing that. As Jasmine said, you're not going to copy, or you shouldn't be copying and pasting. And I find it hard to believe that a lot of the guys on this call would even think that would be acceptable and then submitting that as their own work. So sort of trust your own instincts on it as well, I think is a really good tip. But do use and attribute quotes from certain people or statistics that back up what you're saying. I think that's a very powerful addition to any article that you're writing.
Thank you. So one thing that ties in with this is also not copying others, but your own rights as a writer. So what should you ask for? Is there like a form you have to sign before you write for someone, or is there like a standardized contract, or what should you be looking out for with regards like to your rights in other people publishing your work, or you republishing your work, publishing in multiple outlets and things like that?
From my point of view, and I'll let Gavin and Jasmine answer this because I think they have much more experience, because I'm mainly writing for companies content that they want, and I always retain copyright until they've paid my invoice in full, and that's part of my terms and conditions. So, you know, if they don't pay their invoice, they don't get copyright, and in fact they don't actually get the final piece of work. But I haven't written for a long time for magazines and others that haven't been on behalf of companies. So I'll let the other guys who are far more professional answer that one.
As a freelancer, I do have like my own contract, but I would say probably it's 50% of the time that I supply that contract, and then 50% of the time that the company has their own. I would say, especially if like you're early in your career, that you want opportunities that will let you have the byline. And even if you don't get the byline, that'll let you use it in your portfolio. Even, you know, now I think I have just over like 4 years of like overall experience, like professionally, and like either with geospatial clients or with other freelance clients. Even with 4 years, I still like to only take on opportunities where I'll be able to add the work to my portfolio. But I think either way, if it's you, if you'll be listed as the author, or you can add it, whatever it is you agree to, make sure that that's in writing. And so if the company doesn't provide their contract, I'll have mine. And even if it's not in writing, like we'll spell out the terms, or if it's not in a formal contract, we'll spell out the terms in an email. But just so long as we're agreed on that, agreed on things like turnaround time, or how long it'll take me to provide the draft, and then how long it'll take for revisions, just so that we're all on the same page about all of that. It gives you something to refer back to. And yeah, I just think if you're starting out, you want to be able to have as much work under your name as you can, because that's the kind of stuff that people will want to see when you're looking for new opportunities.
Yeah, the paid clients, yeah, there's often a contract or a release if they specifically want to hold the copyright. Unless in the United States, unless otherwise stated, if the byline is yours, you maintain the copyright, unless that publication is asked you to release it. Even if you work on a pen name, it can still be the case if you can show that it was actually you. So it varies. The magazines, often things are just done on a verbal handshake, but the default is, if that's your byline, you can use it in your portfolio and you hold the copyright on it. And plagiarism, I stopped writing for one publication because a number of the writers had been finding out that they were being plagiarized by their own publication sometimes. And the straw that broke the camel's back one time was, I just, for a client, had a pretty sizable article published under a pen name. And sometimes I use pen names, so I'm not saturating certain areas and things like that. But I found it about 75% copied in a publication. And of course, the answer from them was, well, you know, over here in the unnamed South Asian country, they said, you know, copyright's not that big a deal over here. Well, it is in the rest of the world. So yeah, good to have that up front when you're talking to your client or the magazine, as Jasmine talked about. Can I put it in my portfolio? And who actually retains the copyright?
Thank you. Those were some great insights, definitely. We have another question on Slido. Are there any tips for a good place to find good definitions of geospatial technical terms? I think that's in reference to when we were talking about not knowing enough about the topic and learning on the job, so to speak.
I thought that was an interesting question. I don't necessarily have an answer to like where I go for specific terminology, but I will say that for that, first assignment that I remember having when I first started my in-house content marketing role. And I was working on that white paper. I like made my own glossary of terms as I was working on it. So every time I came across something new where it was talking about like different types of satellite imagery and how that's used and analyzed, every time it was a word I didn't know, I like made this long list and I just kept adding to it with every project. So definitely having my own glossary of terms helped me to go back and reference those things. And then over time, it got to the point where I didn't really need it anymore because I'd like looked at it so much that I embedded some of those terms. So it might help to make your own glossary as you come across things you don't know and just sort of add them to the list to refer back to.
I think that's a great question. And in fact, I did exactly the same as Jasmine when I started out writing about geospatial many years ago. And I think actually it's something that those of us working in geospatial comms ought to maybe think about, because the fact that I can't think of one off the top of my head sort of implies that perhaps there isn't one. I don't know. What do you think, Gavin?
Geospatial is a really nebulous subject. It is broader than, you know, if you think backwards from this concept, everything in our built and natural worlds has a geospatial component. Everything could be framed in a conversation with a geospatial tilt to it. Every industry has some geospatial component to it somewhere down the line. So it's really a broad subject. I put in the chat box, there's a glossary for the Ordnance Survey of the UK, the Open Geospatial Consortium. Those are a great start. Learning about geospatial, especially if you intend to write in that field, is a matter of sitting down and setting aside some time, daily or weekly, where you're going to read geospatial publications. And more important, you're not just going to skim over the titles. You're going to go, okay, I'm going to read this whole article in here because I don't understand anything about it. And as you read through it, you're going to find out the threads it has into the other areas of geospatial. So it's just too big a subject to look for any single source. It really, it's, you know, it can take decades to know everything about it. But when you write any particular piece of content, part of that process is researching that subject. So you're going to be digging in each time. And by attrition, you're going to be learning more and more about it. And also getting a little hands-on. If you're a writer and you contact a company and say, hey, I'd like to test drive this piece of software, this equipment, they're thrilled to have you do it because you're probably going to write something about it. Other ways to learn. Anyhow, yep.
And another question is, could you touch on coming up with a rate card?
So when I first started freelancing, and this is something I started doing last year, I made a rate card based on like for each type of service that I wanted to offer, how many hours I expected it to take me to do it, and then what I wanted my hourly rate to be and multiplied it by that and came up with a project rate. So for instance, if I wanted to start out making $50 an hour and I thought it would take me 4 hours to write a blog post, then I would say $200 was the rate when people asked me how much I charged to write a blog post. But I remember I sat down with someone who is a professional copywriter who was doing like these borrow my brain sessions. And we started talking about rates and I showed her mine and she was like, these are way too low. Like I was starting out with very low rates. And so she kind of walked me through the fact that it's always going to take you longer than you expect to do something. And I was kind of basing like what I estimated my time to be based off of what I was doing in-house. But, you know, it's just always going to take longer, especially when you are working with more than one company at a time. And so she just kind of walked me through, give yourself more time on your estimate and then also raise your rate to something that accounts for not only the time when you're working, but the time when you're not, because I mean, if you are freelancing full-time, that kind of replaces like a guaranteed salary. So you just kind of have to account for a lot more as far as expenses, the things that it takes to run your business and all of that. So, but I still do calculate when it comes to like projects that come up. I still do calculate it that way. I have the hourly rate that I want to make, and then I multiply that by how long I expect it to take me to do the project. And that's the start of the quote. And I might add in for other things. We talked about whether or not you get the byline. If I don't get a byline and I can't add it to my portfolio, then I will usually like bump the rate up for that. And just for, considering other things, if it's highly technical and it's going to take a lot of research time, adding to the quote for that. So that's how I come up with the base. And then those are some of the things that will determine the overall quote that I provide.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to have the rate card tailored to every piece you write, because yeah, as you said, if it's technical and it might take more time, then it definitely makes sense to charge extra. And I also noticed another question in the Zoom chat. For someone without a writing background, are there any books, materials you'd recommend to improve my writing? I think Gavin touched on the Red Book of Writing earlier, but are there any others?
I read a lot of books by journalists that I like. Autobiographies. I'm just reading a series at the moment I've read before, but they're based on the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s by a journalist called John Simpson, who is a BBC journalist that I really admire. So I try to, if I particularly like somebody's style of reporting, I quite often am naturally drawn towards their books, and I usually find myself coming away with some ideas about writing, even from that sort of thing. So I think I'm a great advocate for reading as much as you can and assimilating information that way, drawing it in. So yeah, definitely journalists that you would admire. There's a couple of really good books that are sort of geospatial based. And one is called Prisoners of Geography. It is by another journalist whose name is completely escaping me at the moment. But if you search Prisoners of Geography, and he's written a second book, that's a very accessible book in terms of getting to grips with, is it really about geopolitics, but it's a very accessible book, and he uses some interesting language to describe some geographical terms. So that, again, I've learned a lot from reading that particular book. So I think just expand your horizons, take in as much as you can. And if you want to write, you should be curious anyway. So the idea of, reading lots and researching lots should come naturally. And I just find that makes, I'm more likely to sit and read a book, in that way than I am to sit and watch a training video or something. So that might be one way to do it, a fun way to do it, maybe.
I agree with that. Actually reading what geospatial writers write. Now, you don't want to plagiarize content, but kind of emulating a style is not plagiarism. And if you read in the geospatial publications and then go to the vendors, the manufacturers' websites, and read their case studies and their published articles, reading those styles. You mentioned books, noted geospatial writers, Canadian Mark Monmonier. He's written a series of books, The Lake Effect, and also the one that really got into the mainstream was called How to Lie with Maps. Was an interesting treatise on the history of how people do that. So reading and seeing the tone and the style of those, because those are popular with the geospatial community. Yeah, read the examples in the publication. It's part of that learning process about learning about geospatial, is learning about geospatial writing and reading the examples.
And I would suggest for anyone who's looking to get started in content writing, there's a really good book for beginners called The Content Marketing Writer by Jennifer Goforth Gregory. It's got a lot of helpful information on like how to pitch companies, how to find the companies to pitch, and just the person who wrote it is also a freelance content writer in the B2B technology space primarily. So it kind of fits in really well with Geospatial, and she just gives a lot of like practical advice. There's also a Facebook group that goes along with that book. So there are members there who will talk through like things like quotes if they want a project, and they'll kind of give you the background of the project and what they're thinking of charging. So people will help you determine quotes, and they're just a very helpful group of people. If you have any like issues with clients that come up, they're really helpful with kind of like being able to talk through those types of things as a freelance writer.
Thank you. I just noticed the time, so I will stop the recording now, and if the panelists are still available for a couple minutes to answer some questions, then we'll do that as well. So